So welcome everyone to How to Write a Tech Resume. Today we'll be going over some of the basic things to consider when you're preparing a resume in general, but more specifically if you're writing a resume with technical experience on it. So more specifically, this will be relevant to folks who are working in fields like computer science, in data science, or fields where you have projects or tangible products that you might want to describe on your resume, in addition to the more traditional work experience you would include on a resume. So we'll kind of go over the intricacies there that are going to go inside of a technical resume beyond just a traditional resume. So just a really general tip before you go ahead and get started in preparing a resume. I know that some of you might have resumes that are polished, that are ready to go. You know, you're ready to go to the career fair, whereas some of you this might be like your first time writing a resume and you're not entirely sure what is going to go on there. So some questions for you to think about when you're preparing a resume is to ask yourself, what is the purpose of a resume? Who's the intended reader and what message do I want to send? One thing that I think people should realize about resumes is that you're not going to explain your entire work history on your resume. I think that's where some people might fall into the trap of, oh, I need to talk about every single thing that I've done since I've started my college career on your resume. And that's not necessarily true. One thing that you would really want to consider for a resume is that your resume is providing a snapshot of the most relevant experiences to the employer that shows that you know or potentially know how to do the job that they're asking for in the job description or the internship description. It's not to provide like a complete overview of every single thing that you've done. And so that's also important for you to recognize when you're thinking about, who's going to be reading your resume. Is it going to be someone that has like a lot of technical experience, or is it going to be someone who just is acting as like a recruiter for an organization and maybe doesn't have all of that technical expertise or knowledge? So that's something that you also want to be mindful of when you're preparing your resume and you're phrasing things throughout your bullet points and such. And then lastly, what sort of message do you want to send? Do you want to convey yourself as someone who is talented across multiple different like skill sets? Like, do you want to have a mix of both soft skills and hard skills on your resume? Are you more focused on showing people that you're really good at programming and that you know how to work with a variety of different frameworks and programming languages? It also really depends on the organization that you're applying to and what their company or culture values. So that's also something you want to keep in mind. And it's also closely associated with who the intended reader is knowing what the other company is looking for when they're looking at your resume. So we'll just go ahead and start with the basics of what a resume should include, and specifically what a technical resume will include. So of course, you'll want to start off with your heading. So this is, the part on the top of your resume that'll have your name, your phone number, your email address, some basic geographic information if you feel comfortable including that, as well as if you have links to like a GitHub or a LinkedIn, you can include that on the top of your resume as well. You'll follow that with your education section. So for most of you here, if UMD is the only institution that you've attended so far, then you'll just go ahead and list the University of Maryland. But if you attended like a community college, let's say, and you received an associate's degree or some certificate from the institution, then you can go ahead and list your community college experience there as well. I would generally recommend keeping off high school on there only because more space on your resume should be dedicated to explaining some of your more relevant experiences. And as we'll kind of see later on, you just want to try and transition from including things from high school to including things that you've done specifically in college, but more on that a little bit later. You'll also have a section immediately after your education section that'll detail your skills. So this is a way for resumes to get a really cursory glance of what technical skills you can bring to the table. So this will typically include things like programming languages, softwares, frameworks, or any other piece of software or hardware that you know how to use that's relevant for the position that you're applying for. Along with the skills section, you'll also include any foreign language skills if you know how to speak a foreign language. One thing I will mention here is that I would generally leave off things like soft skills like leadership, communication, teamwork, because those things, instead of listing them in your skills section, because it's a little bit harder to quantify or qualify those types of skills if you just list them in that section, it's better to include descriptions of those soft skills in your bullet points for either your projects or your work experience. And then lastly, you'll conclude with like an experience and campus and community involvement section. So there are a lot of different ways for you to kind of break up this section. So you just some general advice about what could go in there. For sure, it can include internships, part-time jobs, projects, either for class or personal projects, leadership experiences, volunteer experiences, and whatnot. It's just that when you think about how you want to structure your experiences, there might be different ways you want to section them off instead of lumping them all together in one like experience section. So some common ways that I've seen people break this section up is to have one like project section. So for class projects and personal projects, and then follow it with like work experience. So things like if you had a part-time job or if you like did like an internship or something. Sometimes I've seen people do it where they break it up to technical experience and then like other experience. So technical experience being like if you've held an internship before where you did a lot of programming, or if you held like a research assistantship that involved a lot of technical work, you could include all of those in like a technical experience section and then have another experience for your other like unrelated work experiences section. That again can demonstrate some of the soft skills or other transferable skills that can be applicable to any job. So there's no one way necessarily how to break that section up, but those are just some recommendations based on what I've seen from students in the past. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and break it up into each of the specific sections that I mentioned in the previous slide. So these are just some of the best practices for how to format and explain some of the information you have for each section. So for the education section specifically, you'll go ahead and include the degree and major that you're earning. So for example, if you want to say that you're getting a bachelor's degree in computer science, you would say that you're earning a Bachelor of Science in computer science or a Bachelor of Science, comma, computer science. One thing that I would avoid doing is saying that you're getting a bachelor's in computer science or that you're majoring in computer science without naming the actual degree that you're getting. And this is more for like credentialing purposes, because at least in the United States, there's no particular degree that's called a bachelor's in computer science. It's usually broken up into things like Bachelor of Science, Bachelor of Arts, Bachelor of Fine Arts, Bachelor of Music. But you just want to be sure that you're describing the actual name of the degree you're getting, followed by what it is that you're majoring in. And so for those of you who might be double majoring in something that's leading to the same degree, say you're double majoring in like computer science and math, for example, you'll want to say that you're getting a Bachelor of Science in computer science and mathematics. You wouldn't list them as like Bachelor of Science in computer science and Bachelor of Science in mathematics. You wouldn't list them as two separate degrees. You would list two separate degrees. For example, if you're getting like a Bachelor of Science in computer science and then like a Bachelor of Arts in history, right? Because those are two completely separate degrees that you're earning at the university. So that would be the only situation in which you would list two separate credentials. But for most of you, I would imagine that Bachelor of Science in whatever it is that you're majoring in is going to be the most common option. Be sure to list the name of the university, very important, the University of Maryland. And then for your expected graduation date, I would put like expected or anticipated, the name of the month and the year that you're graduating. So if I were to graduate this spring, for example, I would say expected May 2021. If I were graduating like in May, like spring 2023, I would say expected May 2023. And as a general advice going forward, whenever you put dates on your resume, it's generally best to put the name of the month instead of just putting the number. or putting like a season like summer 2020 or summer 2019 or something. It's good to be as explicit as possible so that employers know exactly what date and month ranges you're working with. And then lastly, a GPA, if you have above a 3.0, I would include that on your resume. Some employers, especially if they have GPA requirements for their positions, will ask you what your GPA is if you don't have it listed there. So best practice, if you have a 3.0 GPA, go ahead and list it there, because some employers may ask you that if you don't have it transparently listed on your resume. And then lastly, for the education section, another like really common thing that I see is that like the relevant coursework section, I think is something that tends to come up a lot for students. Our general recommendation is that you only put in coursework that is indicative of upper level electives or upper level required coursework. I know that a lot of common requirements for you all, depending on what your major is, I'll just use computer science as an example again, is that you probably all have taken object-oriented programming 1 and 2. You've all probably have taken or will be taking algorithms. You all probably took like calculus and linear algebra. All of those courses, since it's common across, all computer science students or across like people in like the STEM field, are not things that I would highlight on your resume. But if you do have things that are particularly relevant to the internship that you're applying for, so say like you're applying to like a data science internship, for example, if you've taken courses in like machine learning, data science, data analytics, then those classes absolutely you can include on your relevant education section. But again, the main thing I'm suggesting here is to keep out some of the lower division coursework that you know that every other student is taking within your major. All right, so we'll go ahead and go into the experiences section. So there's a lot of kind of text on the screen right here, and we'll just kind of go through it piece by piece in terms of what I think the most important takeaways are here. So when you're writing your bullet points on a resume, a general thing that I've seen on most effective resumes is to keep your bullet points to either like 1 line or 2 lines at most. You don't want to be overly verbose with the way that you're describing your experiences, but at the same time, you want to provide enough context and detail so that, as someone, for example, who's read a lot of resumes from students, I still want to be able to understand what it is exactly that you were doing in that position, or what you were doing with that specific project. So like that points to the third question here. Would I, or would any outsider understand what your experience was at that particular role and what impact you had on the organization or project as a result? Some of the ways that you can do that is to include really strong action verbs and to quantify your experience. So for those of you who have talked with members of the Career Center staff, you might have heard that we like to see metrics included on your resume. So this includes things from like numbers, percentages, dollar signs, just to provide as much detail and context to the experience as you can. And using those metrics can then be used to turn your bullet points more from just a job description to like an accomplishment list. So instead of just saying like, oh, I tutored students at this school, you could say, I tutored 20 students in a traditional classroom setting on, calculus and linear algebra topics, right? So you want to provide that level of specification that reads more than just, oh, like here's the thing that I just copy and pasted from my job description. So another thing to keep in mind there to turn your bullet points into accomplishments is to not just like list out what you just like listing out like the project itself or what it is that you did, but to also go into a little bit more detail about what your role was. Did you, for example, write a specific section of the code that led to your project or product to do this specific thing? Or did you assume a leadership capacity? Did you oversee or supervise team members who are working on a specific section of the project? All of this is there to make sure that when you're describing your experiences, you're providing as much detail as possible. That again can kind of lead towards some of the soft skills or some of the more tangible technical skills that you are demonstrating through your experience, more so than just saying that you did X, Y, and Z thing. So another thing that I'll kind of offer here is, especially for your technical experiences section, is to be explicit with some of like the programming languages or softwares that you're using in a particular project or internship. This is especially useful if you are applying for an internship or job and it mentions that they're looking for people who know how to use a particular programming language or software. If you include some of those keywords in your experiences section, especially if the company or organization is using like a resume filter, it's more likely that your resume will kind of get past that and actually move to like an actual person reviewing it if you're able to match the language of the job experience to your resume. Let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. So moving on again with your experiences, if you also, for some of you, you might have like competed in like hackathons, or you might have like done something really substantial beyond just the actual process of working for a particular organization. So it's important that you also include like deliverables or end products in your experiences as well. So for those of you who are working on a research assistantship, right, it's important that, you know, if you gave a conference presentation, like if you presented a poster or if you helped co-author a manuscript, it's these like tangible deliverables that are also really important to highlight on a resume, because then it shows that you're going above and beyond what, you know, people will typically think if you're working in those roles. Same thing, like if you are working for an internship or a company and you presented like a pitch to like a client or something, that's also really important for employers to know, so that one, it demonstrates that you have like other skills that go beyond just like, oh, I know how to program, or I know how to code, or I know how to do this and that, but that you're also able to communicate your results to people in an effective manner. So if you have any of those accomplishments where you can talk more than just what you actually did in the position, be sure to include those in your resume as well. Same thing if you received like a promotion, or if you received like any awards or honors, like say you received like Employee of the Month because you exemplified really great customer service. That's also something that you should talk about to show employers that you're doing more than just what's required of you in each role. Another thing to also mention in the experiences section, this more relates to what you can actually put in that section, is to not neglect things that aren't necessarily the most related to like a technical experience, right? I know a lot of you are probably involved in like student organizations, in like a fraternity or sorority, or like a volunteering organization or other philanthropy work that can demonstrate, again, like those soft skills that I said, you know, maybe you should incorporate into some bullet points so that you can show employers that you know how to be a good leader, that you know how to work with a team, that you know how to communicate effectively. So if you have those additional club experiences or volunteer experiences, that is absolutely something that you should incorporate in your resume as well, so that you're showing to employers that you're a well-rounded individual beyond just knowing that, okay, like I know how to code, I know how to do this, and you know, I know how to like program, or I know how to analyze data effectively. So if you, again, if you have like particular accomplishments from those organizations that you want to highlight, like for example, did you raise like money for like a particular fundraiser? Did you manage like a listserv, or like did you you know, increase like member retention, or did you recruit new members to your organization? Did you like plan outreach events? Did you plan like socials? Those are all things that, again, demonstrates a higher level of responsibility within an organization beyond just saying that, oh, I was just a member and I just showed up to meetings. So if you've taken some leadership capacities in those non-technical roles as well, that's also something you should highlight in your resume. So this is just a quick example of a way that you can kind of turn maybe a non-technical experience into something a little bit more descriptive. So you could go ahead and see what the differences are from like, the first 3 bullet points you see here versus the ones that you see on the bottom. So go ahead and just type in what you notice in the chat between the 2 bullet points. Like, what are some things that you think are noticeably different from the first, like the top section versus the bottom section in terms of the bullet points? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I see some comments coming in. The second bullet points are more descriptive. There are numbers to quantify. Yes, bolding the header is also just, also kind of helps the eligibility of the work experience. First sounds like minimal effort. The first one describes more duties. Second one, yeah. So I think you all are kind of hitting on like those main points there of you see that the second descriptions include a lot of these metrics or figures, right? Instead of just saying that, oh, I was responsible for residents in a hall, they said, specifically, I oversaw 60 residents. And not only did I just say that I oversaw them, they also provided a little bit more description about what they specifically did with the residents. So I counseled them on academic transition and social issues. Another thing that I like to see was, that they advised the hall council, but beyond just advising the hall council, they talked more specifically about what they advised the hall council on. And then they also included in another metric about managing a budget of $2,000. So those are some things that you can think about beyond, like, whether it's a technical experience or a non-technical experience. Think about those ways that you could be more descriptive about what exactly you did within each role and frame it as an accomplishment by including some of these metrics as well. So good job, y'all. I think you all are really noticing what the key points of writing an effective resume are. Okay, so then we'll go ahead and now talk about the technical skills section. So with the technical skills section, I see it being done in a lot of different ways. So we'll just go ahead and kind of talk about what some of the best practices are for this section. So with the technical skills section, first and foremost, you should only list the programming languages, softwares, frameworks that you know that you would feel comfortable using in like a work environment. I wouldn't include anything that you've just heard of or maybe just used like just once for like a class project. I would generally make sure that these programming languages that you include in your technical skill sections are ones where, if an employer were to ask you to like build something really makeshift on the spot, say during like a technical interview, that you'd feel like some degree of competence of being able to do that. With, perhaps a little bit of guidance, but, not needing to like completely look up, oh, how do I like format the syntax for this or whatnot. So you want to be sure that when you list something on your resume, the general guideline that I give to students is that, if it's on your resume, then it's fair game for an employer to ask you a question about how to use that, or for them to ask you to implement something using that programming language. So to that point, if there is a particular programming language or skill that you've done for like a significant amount of time and you feel like you're particularly skilled in that aspect, be sure to note that on your resume in that section. So you could say like 2 years, or another denotation that I've seen people use is like advanced, which again, like to varying degrees, advanced, like those skill levels can mean different things to different people. And so something that I would encourage you all to do is, if you can, try to be a little bit more specific. I think including the years or the time frame can be a good way to do that. That being said, if there are other ways of you being able to quantify your experience on your resume, you could also incorporate that as well. Again, if you can also weave in your technical skills into your project experience or your previous work experience, that again, beyond just telling me that, oh, I've worked on like Python for X number of years, or I'm like really good at Python, you're able to demonstrate to me that you actually know how to use it in an out of classroom setting, which to me would be extremely important as a recruiter. So yeah, so to kind of wrap it all together, some basic tips about the technical skills is if you're able to and if you're comfortable to, be sure to include your proficiency levels, and especially highlight the skills that you feel the most comfortable using. And especially if there are particular like programming languages or skills that you know that the internship position or job description is asking candidates to know, then those are also some things that you should consider highlighting on your resume. Okay, so I know that some of you might be in this position where you've never had like a technical internship yet. You're not entirely sure what it is that you can do to make your resume stand out, or you're just not sure how to get like that first experience. And that's totally okay. We all have to start somewhere. And so it's about being a little bit creative to see how you can apply some um, additional experiences to your resume that can either one, bolster your technical expertise, or two, like show that you have a diversity of experiences that can then transfer over to a current role that you'd be interested in applying for. So one thing that I would recommend is to do like some volunteer work. I know that volunteering isn't the most, what generally isn't considered to be like the most prestigious roles, but volunteering is actually a good way for you to build some of your expertise, especially for organizations that may not be able to include or compensate people for them to do like some additional work. Another thing that I've seen people do in this regard is not, say like if you're working for a part-time job already, but it's not necessarily the most technical in nature, you could try to brainstorm ways with your supervisor to see if you can include some more technical ways to make your current work processes a little bit easier, or if there are things that you can do within the larger organization that could benefit from some technicalization. I don't know if that's a word, but in a ways that you can incorporate some programming or technology into your workflow to start building that competence outside of a traditional like technical internship or job. Another thing that I also see a lot of people do is that they'll tend to start like passion projects or personal projects so that they can add that onto their resume. This does require a little bit of additional work outside of like class. And I know that folks can be really busy with, coursework, with student organizations and whatnot. But what I've seen from people is that if they find a particular project or a particular thing that they're really interested in and they're able to devote some additional time to it, that in and of itself can be a bullet point or a section in your resume that can garner some attention, that you'd be able to speak to what exactly that you're working on that can then translate over to a work experience that you're applying for. And the benefit of that is that you have complete ownership of what it is that you're working on. So say like that you want to work for a particular company that is well known for using like C, or is particularly well known for doing things in like JavaScript, HTML, CSS. If you know that that's like the type of work that you want to go into, then it would be good to align some of your personal projects with those skills so that you're able to develop something that will actually make use of those skills. And another thing that you could do is to, don't let like a lack of experience stop you from like trying to, still pursue additional experiences. So think about ways in which you can try and get, experience in whatever way you can, even if it's not the most related to the thing that you actually want to do. That can still be a good way for you to kind of tangentially work your way into a role that will land you to where you want to be in the future. So one way that I've seen a lot of people do it, especially in like the computer science realm, for example, is that they'll work for like IT, or they'll work at like a help desk or something, just so that they're in like a setting where, yes, there's like a lot of technology work around it, but yes, it's not directly related to like programming or to software development, right? But it's still putting you closer to roles that still work heavily with technology. And you never know, like you could still get some of those transferable skills from working in those positions that can then help you later on into like a more traditional software engineering or software development, or whatever role it is that you'd like to do. So I know that it's difficult in this environment, especially with the pandemic going on, to try and get some of those valuable experiences. So you will have to be a little bit creative, and it will take like some self-initiative to get there, but there are opportunities around you. You just might need to look in some more creative avenues for some of those ways you can develop your skills. All right, so this one experience here is the resume sample that we have in our TERP guide. So for those of you who aren't aware, the TERP guide is a very comprehensive resource guide that's put on by the University Career Center. It has lots of resume samples, cover letter samples, and so forth to help you with your internship or job search. So this is the generic technical resume sample that we provide in the TERP guide. And you'll see that it implements a lot of the tips that I've talked about in today's presentation, in terms of formatting, in terms of creating descriptive bullet points, in terms of being sure that they are balancing out some of the soft skills and hard skills in each of the positions. So this, again, is available on the University Career Center website for you all to look at. All right, so then lastly, we'll just go over some general resume tips in terms of formatting. So font size, you'll want to keep it anywhere from 10 to 12, just so that it's like large enough for people to read. Margins, you can go anywhere from 1/2 inch to 1 inch. One page is generally what I would recommend for most people if you're applying to like jobs or internships. The one exception I will say is that if you're applying to like graduate school, for instance, and they're asking for like a combination between like a resume or a CV, or if you're interested in sending in something that also blends in some of your research background, then it's okay if your resume goes beyond the 1-page limit. I will say that it is important that you don't have too much white space. Like if you are planning on going into a second page or a third page even, that you're able to fill out the entire page and you're not leaving like half or like a quarter of the resume just completely blank. So be sure that if you are deciding to go on to a 1-page for another reason, that you are able to fill out a complete page. And the next point about no high school after sophomore year is just a general advice that we give to make sure that your experience on your resume is the most up-to-date as possible. The one caveat to that, again, is that if you have something that is like super relevant to what it is that you are doing or what you're applying for, then you can keep it on there. I think I was meeting with someone a couple of weeks ago where they were wondering, oh, like this is something that I did in high school, but it was a really formative experience for me. And they told me that they were interested in going into like AI and like robotics. And they told me that when they were in high school, or I saw on their resume that when they were in high school, they did like a robotics competition and they got like second place or something. So if you have something like super relevant like that, and it's relevant to the thing that you're applying for, then sure, by all means, you can go ahead and keep it there. But for the most part, you want to try and take off your high school experiences by the time you get to the beginning of your junior year, end of your sophomore year. All right. And then we also just have some tips for employers as well. So from like industry feedback, I know that for some people who don't have a lot of personal projects going on, they will list class projects, and that's totally fine. That being said, it is a good idea if you haven't started a personal project to try and get one going off the ground, because that way it'll distinguish your resume from other people who also may not have a lot of project experience, because they don't, like, employers want to make sure that that you have creative capabilities, that you're able to get a project going from start to finish. And then it also shows that you have initiative and the drive to start something on your own with little to minimal supervision. I know that some people tend to list their hobbies on their resume as well. To me and to employers, it really is not the best use of space. And I think this also kind of applies to organizations. I know that some people, for example, they'll list awards for like sports, for example, is one big thing that I see, or they'll list that they're part of like a club sport on campus. Generally, those things, unless you've assumed like a very large leadership role and you're able to demonstrate some transferable skills, those are typically things I would also take off in favor of other like experiences or work experiences that can demonstrate those transferable skills. The next thing, again, is to tailor your resume to the company or position that you're applying for. So for those of you who might have a lot of different like projects or a lot of different work or internship experiences, just make sure that you're selective about what exactly you're putting on your resume, because again, like for the companies and organizations that have those resume filters, you want to make sure that the language that you have on your resume best matches what they're looking for. And so, for example, if you're applying to an organization or a position that uses a lot of like Python and C++, like and you have that experience, you of course want to prioritize that on your resume as opposed to an experience where you use like Java and HTML, right? It just makes sense that you want to make sure that whatever you're putting on your resume best mirrors what it is that the job is asking for. And again, to be concise with the way you describe it, but provide enough detail that an outsider would be able to understand it. And just the last tip here as it relates to the job search in general is that more so than just what you're able to do inside of the classroom, it's also what you're able to do outside of the classroom that counts the most for employers in particular. So hopefully if you find yourself being really if you find yourself not knowing how to take your resume or your experiences to the next level, think about what you can do during your free time or outside of class that can bolster your resume and experiences. Yeah, and so these are the main takeaways from today's presentation. So at this point, I'll go ahead and start taking some questions from folks who have put in anything in the chat. So let me go ahead and scroll up through the.
I think there's any in there yet, Jeffrey. There was one question about slides, and I answered that in the chat, but none.
Okay.
So far.
Let me see. Okay, so I have one private message here. So if I'm a first-year student and don't have that much experience with college organizations, should I still remove all of my leadership experience from high school from my resume? Great question. So I kind of answered this in the last few slides. So if you're still a first-year student, it's totally okay to leave stuff from high school on there. But again, you can start thinking about how you want to make the best use of your time outside of the classroom while you're at UMD. So if you want to start getting involved with some college level organizations, whether they're ones that are related to your own personal interests or ones that are more related to your professional interests, those would be a good idea. So for you, I would recommend keeping it on there. If you don't have anything you can substitute it with right now, but you should still be thinking about how to replace some of those high school experiences with more collegiate level experiences. Great question. Okay. So I see one question, how should I recommend incorporating a minor in the education section? So I would incorporate a minor right underneath your where you write down the name of the degree that you're getting. So say you're getting a minor in like chemistry or something. So then you would write in the first line, right underneath the name of the college, you would say Bachelor of Science in your major, and then you would put in a line break, and then right under that you would say minor in chemistry or whatever it is that you're minoring in. Okay, so I see another question. Does UMD have any formal framework to get volunteer experience, like a web page somewhere for these things? That's a great question. So I know that within the stamp, they have LCSL, which has like a lot of different volunteer experiences that helps, they'll kind of have you serve as like a mentor or a leader that does a lot of volunteering in like a school setting. So they partner with public schools in the Prince George's County or other nearby neighborhoods, and they'll kind of have you like do tutoring, or they'll have you be like a peer mentor. So that's like the one volunteer experience that I'm the most well aware of. I don't know if other people in the chat have other recommendations for other volunteer experiences that they've done. If for those of you who might be interested in working like a clinical setting, for example, I believe that the Health Professions Advising Office also has like some volunteer opportunities if you're interested in getting volunteer experience in that setting. Those are the two things that I can think of off the top of my head, but others, like, feel free to share as well if you have other volunteer experiences that you think might be beneficial for everyone. Okay, so I see one question. If I had many CS related organization experience in high school, should I add those even if they take a lot of space? Great question. So I think, again, it kind of comes down to how you want to balance your work experience, your technical or project experience, and your volunteer and leadership experience. Without being able to see your resume, I wouldn't really be able to give you too much of like tailored feedback to what it would look like for you specifically. I would say if you have something related to high school that, again, is really relevant to your current interests, and I would say including like, say, one organization on there would be perfectly fine. I would say pick the organization that you think is the most representative of your skill sets or is the most relevant to the organization that you're applying for. Depending, like if you're like a freshman or sophomore student, then yes, you can include like one, even two of those experiences. But if you are sort of an upperclassman, then I would try to substitute those high school experiences more for like personal projects or other college level like work or leadership experience. Okay. So I see another question. If I'm a first-year student who only has significant experience with one or two programming languages, how would you recommend beefing up my skills section? Great question. So if you only have like a handful of different skills section in your resume, like if you don't have a lot of experience with particular like programming languages, then there are multiple ways you could go about it. You could include just a skill section that only lists those like one or two programming languages. Alternatively, if you have like foreign language experiences, you could also include that as like a skill in your skill section. So you can have one line that says, technical skills or programming languages, and then right beneath that, you could include foreign languages, and then list out the languages that you speak. Alternatively, if you feel like it would look really awkward to just have those one or two programming languages listed in that section, then you could go ahead and remove that skill section, and instead weave in those programming languages into your personal projects or class projects experience or your work experience, so that you don't have like a whole bunch of white space in your skill section. So great question, and hopefully I answered that. Okay, another question. I have a job experience that is irrelevant to the CS field. Do you still recommend me putting it into my resume? Great question. So I would say it depends on what that work experience is. So without too much like context as to what that is, I would still say it's worth putting non-CS experience on your resume as well, because those non-technical experiences can then be used to demonstrate some of your soft skills like leadership, communication, teamwork, conflict resolution. Those are still skills that every employer would like to see beyond you just being a good programmer. So if you have additional space on your resume to sort of go into those points and still talk about how you've developed some relevant like people skills or soft skills, then I would go ahead and include it in there. The one example that we saw earlier in the presentation about the person who wrote about their resident assistant experience is a great way that you could frame how you've developed some of those soft skills, even in a position that's not directly related to CS or programming. Great question. Another question. So if I'm older than the typical college student and have work experience outside of the CS industry, should I attempt to incorporate that experience as, say, soft skills related to my business minor, or is it better to leave it off? So I think that's pretty relevant to the last question. I would say yes, if you're able to weave it in and show that you've demonstrated or developed some soft skills through that other experience, I would say by all means go ahead and include it on there. Just be sure that when you're describing your experiences, you're incorporating like metrics, details, similar to the level of depth we saw in the examples earlier on in the presentation. Okay, so next question. If I transferred from a university where I was studying chemical engineering, should I still include it in my resume since I switched my major when I transferred at UMD? Great question. So I would say if you only did coursework at a university, but you didn't actually receive like a formal credential, I would say it's okay to leave it off of your resume, especially if you have other things on your resume that you'd like to talk about. So if you have additional project or work experience that you could expand upon, I would say that would definitely take precedent over including the university that you're transferred from. But if you did receive like an associate's degree, or if you did take like significant coursework that you feel like would inform your educational background, and especially if you're going to be working in a industry that it would be beneficial to have knowledge from chemical engineering, then yeah, I would include it on there. So it depends on what organization you're applying for, but for most cases, I would say it's fine to leave it off. Okay, next question. In the education section, what is the best way to note a certain track, computer science, data science track, or is it worth noting at all? Great question. So if you are one of those people, like say in like computer science or biology, I know it's a similar field where, there are like different specializations or concentrations within the major itself. You can go ahead and denote that in your, like immediately after the name of your major as well. So some things that I've seen people do is that like they'll say Bachelor of Science in Computer Science, and then in parentheses they'll say data science specialization or data science concentration. Alternatively, they'll do like a line break, for example, and like the advice I gave about how to format a minor in your resume, sometimes people will put it underneath the Bachelor of Science and say Bachelor of Science in Computer Science, and then a line break, and then say concentration in data science. So there are different ways that you can go about it. So especially if you're applying to a position where noting that specialization would be useful, then by all means, I would go ahead and include it. Okay, what is your opinion on career objectives? So generally speaking, if you need to take up space on your resume, you could go ahead and put a career objective on there. That being said, for a lot of positions, you'll find that if you're submitting a cover letter to that organization, your cover letter basically functions as your career objective. It's just in an expanded format. So especially for times when you're applying to a position that requires you to submit a cover letter, I wouldn't include a career objective, just because whatever you're articulating in the cover letter is basically what you are saying in your career objective. And even then, even if you're applying to a position that doesn't require a cover letter, I would say, a lot of people know that your objective is to get a job with the position or organization that you're applying for. So putting in a career objective doesn't really add too much to the substance of your resume. So I would say I would say that space is better dedicated to actually talking about your work experience or volunteer experiences or your projects. So my general recommendation is that unless you're absolutely needing to fill up like one page, then I would say it's better to sort of take it off. Okay, as a CS freshman, would you recommend continue exploring different fields within CS, or would you recommend committing to one area soon to create a more focused resume? That is a really good question. I feel like this might be dependent on what it is that you want to get. I think for people who are still new to the CS field and they're not entirely sure what it is that they want to do quite yet, I think it isn't necessarily a bad idea to start exploring different like specializations within the field that you might be interested in trying out. One way that I would recommend getting that experience is that if there are specific student organizations on campus that specialize in a particular field within CS. So like I know that there's like a data science club, there's a cybersecurity club, there's probably like a robotics and AI organization. Those are good ways for you to just get your feet wet and see if those are different organizations that you to see like if those organizations are places that you'd be interested in continuing to attend their meetings and their events. And then those are also ways for you to see like, is this something that I can see myself doing professionally? And so once you go to like those different organizations, hopefully you'll be able to narrow down what it is exactly that you want to do in the future. And then from there, you could start taking on additional like volunteer opportunities or internships or other experiential learning opportunities that can then give you that professional experience. So I would say at where you are right now as a first year student, it's perfectly okay to start exploring. But I would say once you kind of have a better idea of what you want to do professionally, then you could start narrowing down and getting more specific experiences in what you want to do exactly. Great question. Are there any other questions that people would like to ask? Okay. So we do have some upcoming events with the Career Center. So right after this presentation, we have the How to Rock the CS Career Fair coming up like in like a few minutes. There's a separate Zoom link for that. So be sure to click on that Zoom link. It won't be in this room. So there's the URL for that if you need it. And then we also have CMNS Career Fair Prep drop-in hours. So if you need additional help with your resume right before the career fair, we have these drop-in hour slots available for you to sign up for a 15-minute appointment with either me or Rachel. If you want to sign up for those, you can go into Career Fair Terps, then go to center events and then to workshops and type in career fair prep. It should be one of the very first results to show up. So we have a lot of resources set aside for you all so that you can be as prepared as possible for the career fair in 2 weeks. We also have a tech resume review workshop that's, I believe it's with Fannie Mae or a different organization. I want to say it's Fannie Mae though. That's taking place on February 11th from 5:30 to 7:30. The RSVP links for those are there as well. And then the Computer Science Career and Internship Fair is the 16th from 2 to 7 p.m. And then the General Spring Career and Internship Fair is taking place on the 17th and 18th. And if you haven't signed up for those yet, you can visit the URLs on this slide to go ahead and register for them.
So the 11th, the thing you were just showing is a bunch of different employers. There might be, Fannie Mae might be there, but it'll be a bunch of different employers. What you're probably thinking of is the technical interview workshop. That is going to be done by Fannie Mae. That is also Thursday. I just found out the correct information, so it didn't make it onto these slides before this presentation. But that is also Thursday, and you can get to that from careers.umd.edu and just go to our events calendar and you'll find the information for that on Thursday.
Perfect. Thanks, Rachel. But yeah, beyond that, if you have any other questions, please go ahead and feel free to reach out to either me or Rachel. Our contact information is on this slide. You can sign up for our 15-minute drop-in appointments that are taking place this week and next week. Alternatively, if you want a longer, like traditional 30-minute appointment, you can also go on Careers for Trips and sign up for an appointment with us. But that being said, thank you all for attending today's session. Have a great evening. And for those of you who are interested in attending the How to Rock the CS Career Fair workshop, Rachel put in the Zoom link in the chat. But yeah, have a great evening, everyone, and take care.